The spring morning air was crisp as the black cars pulled up to Westminster Abbey. Kate Middleton smoothed her navy blue dress and checked her reflection one last time in the car window. Today was important, a memorial service for fallen soldiers, and the entire royal family would be present. She had been looking forward to this event for weeks. William stepped out first, straightening his military uniform. The cameras were already flashing, dozens of photographers lined up behind the barriers. Kate took a deep breath and followed, her heels clicking on the stone pathway. She had done this hundreds of times before, but somehow today felt different. As they walked toward the Abbey entrance, Kate noticed Camilla approaching from the opposite direction. The Queen Consort wore an elegant black coat, with a small brooch pinned near her shoulder. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and she carried herself with the confidence that came from years of royal duties. Kate had always maintained a polite relationship with Camilla, though it wasn't particularly warm. There were unspoken tensions that had built up over the years. Small disagreements about royal protocols, different opinions on charity work, and the inevitable comparisons the media loved to make between them. The crowd of onlookers grew larger as more royal family members arrived. Charles stepped out of his car, adjusting his ceremonial medals. Harry and Meghan were notably absent, which had been the subject of much speculation in the press over the past week. Kate noticed how the photographers seemed especially eager today, their cameras clicking more rapidly than usual. She wondered if they sensed something in the air, some tension that even she couldn't quite put her finger on. As they gathered near the Abbey steps for the traditional group photos, Kate felt a strange nervousness in her stomach. She had been feeling more sensitive lately, perhaps due to the stress of recent royal duties and the constant media attention. The press had been particularly harsh in recent weeks, analyzing every outfit choice and public appearance. Camilla approached their small group with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Catherine," she said formally. Kate responded with equal politeness, but there was an edge to both their voices that William immediately picked up on. The memorial service was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes, and the crowd was getting restless. Royal protocol demanded that they enter in a specific order, with careful attention to rank and precedence. Kate had memorized these details years ago, but today she felt uncertain about her place in the lineup. A royal aide whispered something to Camilla, who nodded and began moving toward the entrance. Kate started to follow, assuming they would walk in together as they often did at such events. But something in Camilla's posture suggested this wouldn't be a typical ceremony. The photographers sensed the perfect moment for their shots. Kate raised her hand slightly, preparing to wave at the crowd as she always did. The gesture was automatic after years of royal training. Always acknowledge the people who came to see them. But as Kate's hand moved upward, Camilla suddenly stepped closer. In one swift motion, she reached out and grabbed Kate's wrist, pulling her hand downward. The movement was firm and unmistakable, clearly visible to everyone watching. Kate's eyes widened in shock. She had never experienced anything like this in public before. The Queen Consort's grip was surprisingly strong, and her fingers pressed into Kate's wrist with obvious intent. It wasn't playful or friendly. It was a clear message of dominance. The crowd fell silent for a moment, sensing that something unusual had just happened. The photographers' cameras went into overdrive, capturing every angle of the interaction. Kate's face flushed red, a mixture of embarrassment and confusion spreading across her features. William saw the entire incident unfold. He was standing close enough to hear his wife's sharp intake of breath, close enough to see the hurt that flashed across her face. His jaw tightened, but years of royal training kept him frozen in place. Any reaction from him would create an even bigger scene. Kate tried to pull her hand away gently, but Camilla's grip remained firm for several more seconds. The Queen Consort's message was clear. Kate was stepping out of line, and needed to be reminded of her place in the family hierarchy. When Camilla finally released her hand, Kate quickly lowered it to her side. Her face had gone pale, and her usual confident demeanor cracked slightly. She felt exposed and vulnerable in front of hundreds of strangers and dozens of cameras. The royal aide appeared at Camilla's elbow, quietly urging the group to move toward the entrance. The ceremony needed to begin on schedule, regardless of any personal drama. Kate fell into step behind Camilla, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. Inside the abbey, Kate took her assigned seat and tried to focus on the solemn ceremony ahead. But her wrist still tingled where Camilla had grabbed it, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. William sat beside her, occasionally glancing at his wife with concern. He wanted to reach over and take her hand, to offer some comfort. But royal protocol in such settings was strict. They had to maintain proper composure throughout the entire service. As the choir began singing, Kate stared straight ahead, her mind replaying the incident over and over. She had always known that royal life came with unique challenges. But this public humiliation felt different. It was personal and deliberate. The memorial service continued around them, honoring brave soldiers who had given their lives for their country. Kate tried to focus on the meaning of the day, on the families who had lost loved ones. But her thoughts kept returning to those few seconds on the abbey steps. She realized that the photographers had captured everything, and by tomorrow morning, the images would be splashed across every newspaper and website in the country. The story would dominate the royal news cycle for weeks to come. Camilla sat several seats away, her face serene and focused on the ceremony. She showed no sign of regret or concern about what had transpired outside. If anything, she seemed more relaxed than usual, as if she had accomplished something important. Kate's throat felt tight as she listened to the prayers being read. She had always prided herself on handling royal duties with grace and dignity. But now she felt shaken and uncertain. The public nature of Camilla's action made it impossible to ignore or dismiss. William's military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure. But inside he was struggling with anger and protective instincts. He had watched his wife be humiliated in front of the world, and he had done nothing to stop it. As the service drew to a close, Kate prepared herself for the exit procession. She would have to walk past those same photographers again, knowing they would be watching for any sign of ongoing tension or distress. The organ music swelled as they filed out of the abbey. Kate kept her chin up and her expression neutral, drawing on every lesson she had learned about royal composure. But inside, she felt something had broken that might never be fully repaired. The car ride back to Kensington Palace was silent except for the sound of tires on wet pavement. Kate stared out the window at the London streets, processing the morning's events and wondering how she would handle the aftermath. William finally spoke, his voice low and careful. "Are you all right?" he asked. Though they both knew the answer was complicated, Kate nodded without looking at him, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The rest of the day stretched ahead of them, filled with scheduled appointments and royal obligations. Kate would have to carry on as if nothing had happened, as if her confidence hadn't been shaken by those few seconds of public humiliation. But deep inside, she knew that something important had changed in the royal family dynamic, and there would be consequences that none of them could fully predict yet. The next morning came too soon for Kate. She woke to the sound of rain against the windows of Kensington Palace, and for a brief moment, she forgot about the previous day's events. Then reality crashed back as she remembered Camilla's firm grip on her wrist and the flash of cameras capturing every second. William was already up, sitting in his study with newspapers spread across his desk. Kate could hear him speaking in low, tense voices, with his private secretary on the phone. She knew without looking that the headlines would be brutal. "No comment," William was saying firmly. "We will not be making any official statement about yesterday's events." His voice carried a strain that Kate had rarely heard before. Even through the closed door, she could sense his frustration. Kate pulled on her robe and walked to the kitchen, hoping to find some normalcy in her morning routine. But even the palace staff seemed different today. More careful, more distant. They had obviously seen the news coverage and weren't sure how to act around her. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since dawn. Text messages from friends, missed calls from reporters, and notifications from social media, where the incident was being dissected, frame by frame. Kate turned the device face down and tried to focus on her tea. The children were at school, blissfully unaware of the drama swirling around their family. Kate was grateful for this small mercy. George, Charlotte, and Louis didn't need to be exposed to the complicated world of royal politics just yet. By mid-morning, The full scale of the media storm became clear. The photographs were everywhere, on the front pages of newspapers, trending on social media, and analyzed by body language experts on television talk shows. The headlines ranged from sympathetic to scandalous. "Royal Rift Exposed," read one tabloid. "Camilla's power play," announced another. Some outlets tried to downplay the incident, suggesting it was merely a misunderstanding or an awkward moment caught at the wrong time. Others speculated about deeper tensions within the royal family. Kate's private secretary knocked softly on her study door. Sarah had been with her for 3 years and had become more friend than employee. Her expression was carefully controlled, but Kate could see the concern in her eyes. "Ma'am, we've received over 200 interview requests since yesterday evening," Sarah reported quietly. "The palace press office is coordinating responses, but they wanted your input on how to handle the situation." Kate set down her teacup with shaking hands. 200 requests meant this story had legs and wouldn't disappear quickly. "What does the king's office recommend?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Complete silence for now," Sarah replied. "They believe addressing it directly would only fuel more speculation." "But," she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. "But what?" Kate prompted. "Some of your supporters in the media are suggesting that staying silent makes you look weak. They think you should defend yourself somehow." Sarah's voice was gentle but honest. Kate walked to the window and looked out at the gardens. Even here, in the privacy of her own home, she felt exposed and vulnerable. The incident had been so public, so visible, that there was no way to pretend it hadn't happened. William appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "The palace wants to meet this afternoon," he announced. "My father, Camilla, you, and me. Private discussion about moving forward." Kate's stomach clenched. The thought of sitting across from Camilla so soon after yesterday's humiliation felt impossible. But royal duty demanded it, and she had learned long ago that personal feelings often took second place to family obligations. "What time?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 3 o'clock, Clarence House." William's tone was carefully neutral, but Kate could see the tension in his shoulders. He was caught between loyalty to his wife and respect for his father and stepmother. The hours until the meeting crawled by slowly. Kate tried to focus on her correspondence and charitable work, but concentration was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel Camilla's fingers pressing into her wrist and see the triumph in the older woman's eyes. At lunch, Kate barely touched her food. The palace chef had prepared her favorite salmon dish, but everything tasted like cardboard. William sat across from her, occasionally attempting conversation, but both of them were lost in their own thoughts. "I should have done something," William said suddenly, his fork clattering against his plate. "I should have stepped in when I saw what was happening." Kate looked up at him, seeing the guilt and frustration written across his face. "You couldn't have," she replied softly. "Any reaction would have made it worse. We both know that. But I just stood there and watched while she humiliated you in front of the entire world." William's voice was raw with emotion. "What kind of husband does that make me?" Kate reached across the table and took his hand. Despite her own pain, she could see how much he was struggling with his inability to protect her. "The kind of husband who understands royal protocol and the bigger picture," she said. "You did what you had to do." But even as she said the words, part of her wished he had intervened. She understood the impossible position he was in. But emotionally, she needed to know that he would stand up for her when it mattered most. The car ride to Clarence House was silent and tense. Kate had changed into a conservative navy suit, armor for the confrontation ahead. She had practiced what she would say, how she would maintain her dignity while addressing the situation. Clarence House loomed ahead, its familiar red brick facade looking more intimidating than usual. Kate had been here countless times for family gatherings and official meetings, but today felt different. Today she was walking into enemy territory. Charles greeted them at the door with his usual warmth, but Kate could see the strain around his eyes. This situation was putting him in an impossible position between his wife and his son's family. "Catherine, William, thank you for coming so quickly," he said formally. Camilla was already seated in the drawing room, her posture perfect and her expression unreadable. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and pearls, looking every inch the queen consort. When Kate entered, she stood and offered a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Catherine," Camilla said smoothly, "I hope you're feeling well today." The casual tone and complete lack of acknowledgement of yesterday's incident caught Kate off guard. It was as if Camilla expected them to pretend nothing had happened, to sweep the whole thing under the royal carpet of proper behavior. Charles cleared his throat and gestured for everyone to sit. "I think we all know why we're here," he began carefully. "Yesterday's incident has created some unwanted attention. We need to discuss how to handle the situation moving forward." Kate felt her carefully prepared words dissolving in her throat. The clinical way they were discussing her humiliation made her feel even more isolated and alone. She was the victim in this situation, yet somehow she felt like she was the one being called to account. "I'm not sure what there is to discuss," Camilla interjected calmly. "It was a simple misunderstanding that the media has blown completely out of proportion. These things happen at public events." Kate's eyes flashed with anger. A simple misunderstanding? The grip on her wrist had been deliberate and forceful, designed to establish dominance and put her in her place. There had been nothing accidental about it. William leaned forward in his chair. "With respect, Camilla, it didn't look like a misunderstanding from where I was standing," he said. His voice carefully controlled but firm. The room fell silent. Charles looked uncomfortable, clearly caught between his son's loyalty and his wife's version of events. Camilla's expression remained serene, but Kate caught a flash of something harder in her eyes. "I was simply guiding Catherine in the appropriate protocol," Camilla replied smoothly. "Perhaps my gesture was misinterpreted, but my intentions were entirely proper." Kate finally found her voice. "Guiding me?" she asked, incredulity creeping into her tone. "By grabbing my wrist and yanking my hand down in front of hundreds of photographers?" Camilla's mask slipped slightly. "I was preventing what could have been a more embarrassing situation," she said, her voice cooling. "Your wave was premature and inappropriate for that moment in the ceremony." Kate felt the blood drain from her face. Not only was Camilla refusing to acknowledge the inappropriate nature of her actions, she was now suggesting that Kate herself had been in the wrong. The audacity was breathtaking. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Perhaps we could all agree that the situation was unfortunate, and focus on moving past it," he suggested diplomatically. But Kate was beyond diplomatic solutions. She had been publicly humiliated, and now she was being gaslit about her own experience. "I've been waving to crowds at royal events for over a decade," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I know the protocols better than most." Camilla's smile was sharp as a blade. "Experience and wisdom are different things, my dear," she replied. "Sometimes enthusiasm needs to be tempered with proper judgment." The condescending tone was the final straw for Kate. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I won't sit here and be lectured about proper judgment by someone who thought it was appropriate to physically restrain me in public," she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. William immediately stood as well, moving to his wife's side. "Catherine is right," he said firmly, looking directly at his father. "What happened yesterday was inappropriate, regardless of the intentions behind it." Charles looked pained by the conflict unfolding in his drawing room. "Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down," he suggested. "This conversation isn't serving anyone well." But Kate was done being diplomatic. "Time won't change what happened," she said. "And it won't change the fact that my children will someday see those photographs and wonder why their grandmother treated their mother with such disrespect." The mention of the children brought a new gravity to the room. These weren't just personal grievances anymore. They were about family relationships that would affect the next generation of royals. Camilla's composed facade finally cracked slightly. "I would never intentionally disrespect you, Catherine," she said, but her tone lacked conviction. "If you felt disrespected, that was not my intention." It was as close to an apology as Kate was likely to get. but it felt hollow and insufficient. The damage had been done, both publicly and privately, and a grudging half-apology wouldn't undo it. The meeting ended awkwardly, with promises to revisit the situation when emotions had cooled. But as Kate and William left Clarence's house, she knew that something fundamental had shifted in the royal family dynamics. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing what had just transpired. Kate stared out the window at the London streets, wondering how she would face future family gatherings and public events, knowing that this tension would always be lurking beneath the surface. That evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Kate tried to push aside her troubles and focus on what truly mattered. But even in these peaceful moments, she couldn't shake the feeling that her place in the royal family had become more precarious than ever before. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Westminster Abbey, and the media frenzy had only intensified. Kate sat in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, sorting through the mountain of letters that had arrived from well-wishers around the world. The public response had been overwhelming and largely supportive. "Ma'am, there's another bag of post that arrived this morning," her secretary Sarah announced, wheeling in a cart loaded with packages and envelopes. "The Clarence House office has also been receiving quite a few letters addressed to you." Kate nodded absently, reading a particularly touching letter from an elderly woman in Yorkshire who had written about her own experiences with difficult family relationships. The outpouring of support from ordinary people had been one of the few bright spots in an otherwise difficult period. The royal family's attempt to move past the incident had largely failed. Despite the palace's official silence, the story refused to die down. Body language experts continued to analyze the footage. Royal biographers wrote opinion pieces about power dynamics within the monarchy, and social media buzzed with debates about what had really happened on those Abbey steps. William entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea and a tablet showing the latest news coverage. His expression was grim as he set everything down on the coffee table. "The Sunday Times is running another piece tomorrow," he said wearily. "This time they've interviewed 3 former palace staff members." Kate looked up from her letters, feeling her stomach clench. "What are they saying?" "The usual speculation about tensions between you and Camilla. Anonymous sources claiming there have been other incidents behind closed doors." William ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Kate recognized as a sign of deep frustration. "None of it can be verified, but it doesn't matter. People are eating it up." The past 3 weeks had been a masterclass in how royal scandals developed their own momentum. What had started as a single moment of public tension had snowballed into a full-blown narrative about family dysfunction and power struggles within the monarchy. Kate's children had started asking questions. George, being the oldest at 10, had overheard conversations between staff members and picked up on the unusual atmosphere around the palace. Charlotte had asked why photographers were camping outside their school again. Even 5-year-old Louis seemed to sense that something was different. "The children's security team wants to adjust their protocols," William continued. "The media interest has increased significantly, and they're concerned about the children being approached or photographed in compromising situations." This was what Kate had feared most, that her personal drama would impact her children's lives. She had always tried to maintain as much normalcy as possible for George, Charlotte, and Louis. But the royal fishbowl made that increasingly difficult. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Charles's private secretary appeared, looking formally apologetic. "Your Royal Highnesses, His Majesty would like to speak with you both. He's in his study and asks if you could join him at your earliest convenience." Kate and William exchanged glances. Formal summons from the king were never casual affairs, especially during times of family crisis. They followed the secretary through the corridors of Kensington Palace, past portraits of royal ancestors who had faced their own scandals and survived. Charles was standing by the window when they entered, his hands clasped behind his back in a familiar pose. He turned as they approached, and Kate was struck by how much older he looked. The stress of the past few weeks had taken a visible toll on him as well. "Please, sit down," Charles said, gesturing to the chairs arranged around his desk. "I've been giving considerable thought to our situation, and I believe we need to take some decisive action." Kate felt her heart rate increase. Decisive action in royal terms could mean anything from a public statement to a complete reshuffling of family roles and responsibilities. "The current situation is untenable," Charles continued. taking his seat behind the desk. The constant speculation and negative publicity are beginning to damage the institution itself. We cannot allow personal disagreements to undermine the monarchy. William leaned forward slightly. What are you proposing, Father? Charles picked up a leather folder from his desk and opened it carefully. I've been in consultation with the palace advisors, and we believe the best path forward is a period of separation. Temporary, of course, but sufficient to allow the public interest to die down. Kate's blood ran cold. Separation? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Not in the marital sense. Charles clarified quickly, seeing the alarm on both their faces. A separation of duties and public appearances. You would continue your charitable work, Catherine, but perhaps focus more on private engagements and less public ceremonies where you might encounter challenging situations. The euphemism hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Challenging situations, meaning any event where Camilla would be present. Kate realized that she was essentially being asked to step back from her royal duties to avoid further conflicts with the queen consort. You're asking my wife to go into hiding because Camilla can't behave appropriately in public, William said, his voice sharp with anger. That's completely unacceptable. Charles's expression hardened. I'm trying to find a solution that protects everyone involved, including the institution we all serve. The alternative is allowing this situation to continue festering until it does permanent damage to the crown. Kate found her voice again, though it trembled slightly. And what about Camilla? Is she being asked to modify her behavior or step back from any duties? Camilla is the queen consort, Charles replied stiffly. Her position requires her to maintain a full schedule of royal engagements. She cannot simply disappear from public view. The double standard was crystal clear, and it hit Kate like a physical blow. Because of her lower rank in the royal hierarchy, she was expected to make the sacrifices necessary to preserve family harmony. Camilla, by virtue of her marriage to the king, was essentially untouchable. This is ridiculous. William stood up abruptly, his composure finally cracking. You're punishing Catherine for being the victim of inappropriate behavior. How does that serve justice or the institution? Charles also rose, his own patience wearing thin. I'm trying to serve the greater good, William. Sometimes that requires difficult compromises from all parties involved. Kate remained seated, processing the full implications of what was being proposed. A reduction in her public duties would be noticed immediately by the media and the public. It would send a clear message about her status within the family and her relationship with Camilla. What exactly would this temporary separation look like? She asked quietly. Charles consulted his folder again. You would continue your work with your patronages, but focus on smaller, more intimate events. No major state occasions or ceremonial duties for the next 6 months. We would present it as you choosing to focus on your children and your charitable work. In other words, we would lie to the public, Kate said flatly. Tell them I'm choosing to step back when really I'm being pushed out to protect Camilla from further embarrassment. The king's face flushed slightly. We would present the situation in a way that serves everyone's best interests, he said carefully. Kate looked at her husband, seeing the fury and helplessness warring in his expression. William was caught in an impossible position. Supporting his wife meant defying his father and potentially damaging his own future as king. I need time to think about this, Kate said finally. This isn't a decision I can make in the heat of the moment. Charles nodded reluctantly. Of course. But I do need an answer relatively soon. The palace advisors are pressing for a resolution before the next major royal event. As they left Charles's study, Kate felt as though the walls of the palace were closing in around her. The institution that had welcomed her as a young bride was now asking her to diminish herself to preserve its image. That evening, Kate found herself walking through the palace gardens as dusk fell over London. The familiar paths and carefully manicured flower beds had always been a source of comfort. But tonight, they felt like the boundaries of a beautiful prison. William found her sitting on a bench near the rose garden, staring up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. He sat beside her without speaking, both of them lost in their own thoughts. I can't do it, Kate said finally. I can't pretend to step back willingly when we both know what really happened. It would be dishonest, and it would send a message to women everywhere that they should accept being silenced to keep the peace. William took her hand, threading their fingers together. Then we'll find another way, he said firmly. I won't let them sacrifice you to protect Camilla's reputation. Kate squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his support. But what choice do we really have? Your father made it clear that Camilla's position is non-negotiable. If I refuse to step back, this situation will just continue to escalate. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, William said thoughtfully. Maybe it's time for some honest conversations about how people treat each other within this family. They sat in comfortable silence as the garden around them faded into shadows. Kate knew that whatever decision they made would have far-reaching consequences for their family and their future within the monarchy. The next morning brought another wave of media attention as new photographs surfaced from a charity event the previous week. The images showed Kate and Camilla maintaining careful distance from each other, their body language stiff and formal. Royal correspondents dissected every gesture and expression, adding fuel to the speculation fire. Kate made her decision while having breakfast with her children. George was telling her about a school project on British history, Charlotte was practicing her piano lesson, and Louis was carefully coloring a picture of their family. In that moment of domestic normalcy, Kate realized what she needed to protect. She called Charles's office and requested a meeting that afternoon. When she arrived at Clarence House, she found both Charles and Camilla waiting for her in the same drawing room, where their confrontation had taken place weeks earlier. I've made my decision about your proposal, Kate announced without preamble. I will not be stepping back from my royal duties. I will not be hiding to make this situation more comfortable for anyone else. Charles's face darkened. Catherine, I had hoped you would see the wisdom in a temporary compromise. The only compromise I'm willing to make is this, Kate continued, her voice steady and strong. I will continue to fulfill my duties with professionalism and dignity. I will not retaliate against anyone or create scenes at public events, but I will not pretend that inappropriate behavior is acceptable. And I will not allow myself to be sidelined to cover up someone else's mistakes. Camilla finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. And if your presence continues to create tension at family events? Kate looked directly at her, no longer intimidated by the older woman's rank or demeanor. Then perhaps the person creating the tension should examine their own behavior, she replied calmly. The room fell silent as the implications of Kate's words sank in. She was essentially putting the responsibility for future harmony squarely on Camilla's shoulders, while refusing to be the scapegoat for past incidents. Charles looked between the two women, recognizing that his hopes for a quick, quiet resolution had just evaporated. This is a very difficult position you're putting us all in, Catherine. No more difficult than the position I was put in 3 weeks ago, Kate replied. The difference is that now I'm choosing to stand up for myself instead of suffering in silence. As she left Clarence House that afternoon, Kate felt a sense of liberation she hadn't experienced in years. She had finally found her voice within the royal family, and she intended to use it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with dignity and strength, refusing to be diminished by anyone. The story would continue to evolve in the coming months, but Kate had established her boundaries and her worth. She was no longer the silent victim of palace politics. She was a strong woman who refused to be pushed aside for the convenience of others. The photographs from that day showed a different Kate Middleton walking out of Clarence House. Her posture was straighter, her expression more confident, and her step more determined. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The future queen consort had found her strength and was prepared to use it.